Sometimes in the hurly-burly, argle-bargle, mumbo-jumbo of divisive political discourse, it becomes too easy for us to stop listening to the arguments of our opponents. Remember, we all want to see America thrive, and they all want to see America particleized in a self-aggrandizing orgy of violent destruction, then set on fire to destroy even the remaining traces of the personal liberty and prosperity we once spread not only from sea to shining sea, but all around the world, so they can sweep away our flawed but magnificent nation and replace it with a socialist paradise that will quickly devolve into the hell of oppression and terror that has been the fate of every other socialist paradise, while their misbegotten, ignorant, and self-deceiving idealism slowly reveals itself to be nothing more than a ravenous hunger for power with its attendant sadistic cruelties. But for a moment, let's put those minor differences between us aside and see if we can try to understand our friends on the left so we can begin to appreciate the goals and ideas that have turned them into such flaming dirtbags. For instance, take the riots in Los Angeles. They began when some immigration and customs enforcement officers tried to arrest a number of illegal migrants for the purposes of deportation. Now, sure, you could say the migrants had broken federal laws and the ICE agents are duly appointed federal law enforcement officers working to roll back the slow-motion invasion of our country by unvetted illegals that took place during an administration run by sinister and faceless leftist operatives hiding behind the mindless shell of a once sentient machine politician who had been propped up for half a century by an unimaginably corrupt corporate news media. But let's look at the other side of the argument. We can't just go around randomly sending child molesters and drug dealers back to their native countries. These are jobs Americans won't do because they're largely civilized people. And who will mow our lawns in order to weasel their way into our confidence and get closer to our children? You don't want an untidy lawn, do you? And when you think of it in that larger context, you can see why masked thugs are pelting federal officers with rocks and torching cars and looting businesses while waving foreign flags to signal the fact they want to destroy the last best hope of civilization and replace it with whatever gangsterocracy they just escaped from. Now, some of you might ask, who in the world would believe a crazy-ass argument like that? But let me ask you something. Did you know that 56% of young liberal white women have been treated for mental illness? Think about that the next time one of these ladies posts her support for the rioters. See, when you first hear that most liberal white girls are mentally ill, you probably think the mental illness is just something a little neurotic, like they won't let you pay for dinner but then sleep with you anyway. But no. It turns out that talking to some of these dames is more like being trapped in Arkham Asylum, desperately trying to escape from a shrieking Admiral Levine who's coming after you with one of those emasculators they use to castrate bulls, and then just as you lock yourself in an abandoned broom closet and think you've escaped him or her or whatever the hell he is, you turn around and there's some 21-year-old from UCLA screaming "Globalize the Intifada" and voting for Gavin Newsom. And just as you think you're done for, you wake up in your own bed and whisper, "Thank God, it was only a dream," and then roll over and holy crap, she's lying right next to you, and you didn't even pay for dinner. And also Los Angeles is on fire. So now that we understand that these riots have the full and enthusiastic support of young leftist white women shrieking at us unintelligibly from whatever enclave of privilege has made it possible for them to believe the nutty crap they believe, I think we can begin to have more civilized and serious conversations about providing air support to the National Guard. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show. All right. We are back laughing our way through the end of the world. Nothing says thank you, Dad, like a year of common sense. This is your last chance to get 40% off new DailyWire Plus annual memberships for your dad. Go to dailywire.com/gift and use code DAD40 before the deal ends. Listen, wherever you're watching this, whether it's on DailyWire Plus, where you should be watching it, or on one of the other places that it appears, or just in your imagination, and you leave a comment, even on the walls of your imagination, that is sufficiently morally disgusting and reprehensible, we will read that comment on the air because that's who we are. This is the kind of people we are. Today's comment is from D. Jameson713. The comment says, what Liz said, talking about Liz Wheeler, wasn't for Glenn. She was refuting the arguments made by her conservative colleagues that what Glenn does privately doesn't hurt anyone. I understand you have to come at this in a very delicate way, but man, you really missed the mark with the Liz take. I said that I respected Liz and actually agreed with her that things that people do in private can be destructive. I was taking issue with what power you have to approach that. But I appreciate the comment, and I love Liz and respect her a lot. If you haven't bought Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness, now that Armageddon is coming, and it's like a guide to Armageddon. You're not going to know where to go, what line to stand on. If you haven't read Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness, the New York Times bestseller, wonderful paper in the New York Times. So please go out and get yourself a copy. Let us get to today's episode. No kings, just thugs. What I really want to talk about today are the riots in L.A. and this No Kings demonstrations that the left is calling for on Saturday in cities all across the country. I even saw one in Nashville today, a preliminary. It's supposed to take place on Saturday because I think it's Trump's birthday and he's having a military parade. I was invited to be at the military parade, but I have to be here talking to you bunch of mangy mutts instead. But before we talk about that, before we discuss the No Kings demonstrations coming up, I think we have to discuss the fact whether there'll actually be a Saturday, since Israel finally launched massive attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities, which also seem to have killed a lot of the Iranian leadership and some of their nuclear scientists. Apparently, they planted a drone machine in Iran that then took off and rained hell on these people. And it's funny, I was out to dinner last night with a friend, and he was saying, I was quoting someone as saying that one of the greatest proofs of God and that the Bible is real is the fact that the Jews still exist. The Babylonians don't exist. The Hittites don't exist. You don't see a lot of those around, but the Jews are still here, which is very telling. And I said, that's true, but it's a little worrisome because it means that the existence of the state of Israel is a sign of the end times. And then I went home, and just in time for for Friday the 13th, the news came in that Israel had bombed Iran and that the moon had turned to blood and the sun refused to shine. Donald Trump put out a statement on Truth Social saying, I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest of words, just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get it done. I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipate, or were told, that the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far, and that Israel has a lot of it with much more to come, and they know how to use it. He says the hardliners wouldn't do it. He said later on that it may be better now because most of the hardliners are dead, and Israel is hunkered down waiting for retaliation that hasn't happened yet. It's interesting. The people who I think are on the wrong track, guys like Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson put out a tweet saying, this is going to mean death to our soldiers and billions of dollars in war. We're going to have to get involved in the war. We weren't involved in these attacks at all, except for, of course, it's our weaponry and we support Israel. So we can't say I wasn't involved in all, but we weren't involved practically. And Tucker Carlson says, don't listen to the propagandists. This is going to be a war and a disaster. But the thing about it is, he doesn't take into account what it would be if Iran actually got nuclear weapons, which would be far, far more of a disaster. And that guy that Tucker promoted, that alleged historian, Darryl Cooper, Charlie Kirk put out a tweet saying, should the U.S. get involved in this war? And Cooper said, yes, we should bomb Israel immediately. So look, I've said this before, but it is important to remember, you can have all kinds of political opinions. Even wrong political opinions that result in evil are not evil per se. But if you are putting the democratic free state of Israel, where women and people of different religions are all treated the same and can all serve in office and can all have careers and high-level positions in the country, if you're equating that country with Iran, which is a terrorist, apocalyptic font of oppression and evil, you're doing morality wrong. We are rooting for Israel. We have to be rooting for Israel against Iran. Even those international organizations that the left loves so much, like the UN and the International Atomic Agency and all that, even they are saying, no, Iran is building a nuclear weapon. They are simply, delaying and stalling in these negotiations to get that nuclear weapon ready. So look, it had to happen. Israel had to do it. It doesn't mean it's not dangerous. It is dangerous. It's portentous. And, I heard our own Ben Shapiro, he put out a statement last night. Here's Ben's statement, cut 17.
Oh, Lord, I want to be in that number. Oh, well,
All right, that may be a little enthusiastic for me, but I understand his feelings. We're just going to have to watch what happens. These are all things that are developing as we speak. So let's just move on to Chapter 1, Whose History? Many people say to me, Klavan, you don't look a day over 150. And how do you keep so young when you're really 2,000 years old? I eat really, really well, and I work out, and I make sure that I get the fruits and veggies I need. And Balance of Nature fruits and veggies is the most convenient way to get whole fruits and vegetables daily, especially if you are focused on creating a healthier, happier lifestyle. That is important. Nature's pretty good at giving us the nutrients we need through our fruits and vegetables, but they're just too messy. So Balance of Nature takes fruits and vegetables, freeze dries them, turns them into a powder, and then puts them into a capsule, much easier to eat. You take your fruit and veggie capsules every day, and then your body knows what to do with them. Balance of Nature is just one ingredient of a balanced lifestyle, has no intention to replace a healthy diet, exercise, sleep, or any other healthy habits. It's intended to be used in concert with other healthy habits. I love Balance of Nature because I can take the capsules with me when I'm on the road, and I know that I'm getting my daily fruits and veggies. Go to balanceofnature.com and use promo code Klavan for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer. Plus, get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code, how do you spell it? Klavan. So the situation is that the news is unfolding, and I'm here once a week at the end of the week. And so what I want to talk about, because these protests that have burned parts of L.A., these riots that have burned parts of L.A. are supposed to now spread to cities around the country. And I think this is especially timed to meet with Trump's parade, which will be in D.C. And so I think things are going to be happening. And so what I want to talk about is how all this stuff is represented so that as you're reading the news, you can sort of see what's going on instead of seeing what they tell you is going on, even when people on the right on social media tell you what's going on. Because a lot of people, irresponsibly, in my opinion, are putting out fake tapes and fake videos that look perfectly real and telling you things are happening that just aren't. So this is going to be the No Kings demonstration. And Trump hilariously was asked about this, cut 16.
Several No Kings protests planned across the country on Saturday as well. What are your thoughts on those?
What do they call No Kings?
No Kings.
I don't feel like a king. I have to go through hell to get stuff approved. A king would say, I'm not going to get this. A king would have never had the California mandate to even be talking to him. He wouldn't have to call up Mike Johnson and Thune and say, fellas, you got to pull this off, and after years we get it done. No, we're not a king. We're not a king at all.
It sounds regretful, but still, it's so true. All these judges, like, the federal judge in some some backwater somewhere saying, no, I'm completely shutting down all his programs. That's not the way it works if he's a king. And he's obeyed every single judgment, including when he brought home that clown from El Salvador, that gangster. Just amazingly, he has been really walking the line very carefully with this. But I want to talk about something that speaks into this. A little piece of history. It's ancient history because I was a young man when it happened. And before I tell you the story, which is really an important story, I don't want anyone to think that I'm hoping for violence, because I'm just not. I really don't like to see people die. I don't like to see people hurt. But you do have to ask yourself, who causes the violence? When people cry over the children of Gaza, I understand, but you have to think, why is that happening? It's happening because they're not releasing these hostages, and you can't overlook those hostages and just say, let's move on because tears are on my cheeks. No, you have to go to the source. All right, so I'm going to talk about these riots in LA and something that happened. Let's talk for just a minute about some of the coverage, which has just been outrageously bad. The news media has gone right back into mostly peaceful demonstrator George Floyd mode. Unbelievably biased, toward these rioters who have no argument. There is no argument to stop federal enforcement agents from enforcing federal laws. That is where the name comes from. That is why they're called federal law enforcement agents. These people have broken federal laws, and they're being arrested and sent back to their countries because that's only fair to the people who have to wait a million years for a green card before they can come over and do jobs that Americans theoretically won't do, which, by the way, is complete nonsense. All right. So they go right back into this coverage. Let's just take a look at CBS News. And I want to thank Newsbusters, who are just one of my favorite sites. You should go on there almost every day because they just really have good stuff about the bias in the news on Newsbusters. But this is the CBS Evening News. And the co-anchor, Maurice Dubois, is out on the streets. And he finds a veteran, because that's a voice he thinks that's going to make the argument to more conservative-minded people to interview. But listen carefully to the way he covers this. Cut 2.
Most protesters tell us they're not looking for trouble. Among those we spoke to, Enrico Green, a Marine combat veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. People across the country look at this and say, L.A. is burning. We need Trump to send in the military, send in the National Guard, the Marines, whoever, to get it under control. You say what?
I say that LA is not burning. LA is protesting, LA is standing up for our neighbors, and LA is showing solidarity.
Today, crews attempted to clean up from the latest round of protests, which last night started peacefully and ended turbulently. While scenes like this are being broadcast prominently around the world, here's some context. It's all happening in a small part of downtown L.A., at and around City Hall and the Federal Building, where detainees from ICE raids have been taken just a few blocks in a county of nearly 10 million people.
So he finds a veteran to side with the illegals. Then he tells us that these are mostly peaceful, but there's little turbulence, like rocks being thrown at law enforcement agents, cars being torched and all this. One, I think it was ABC, said, these are just people having fun watching cars burn. Why should the National Guard get involved? You think I'm making that up, but I'm actually not. And then he says it's only happening in a little area where there are government buildings. So the DailyWire staff is now working around the clock to find clips of Dubois saying on January 6th that the turbulence in the Capitol was only happening in one government building in a DMV, the D.C., Maryland, Virginia triangle of about 6 million people. We're not finding that clip somehow. So CBS News, I don't want to use a technical. I've worked in the news business. I don't want to use a technical term, but they are lying scum, and they're pretending to be journalists. And then Ed O'Keefe does an interview, and they pick these guys so carefully, right? This is the Obama Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, who was a big defender of the Iran deal, right? So he's not a happy guy, but he was also a Republican. So they're thinking he's a mod, he's an in-between guy. And listen to this. O'Keefe asks Hagel, isn't it going to be difficult if Trump calls up the troops in other cities, right? Because on Saturday, there are going to be these demonstrations on other cities. What if he calls up won't they just have to tell the commander-in-chief to take a hike? Listen to this. This is cut 4.
When they hear the president say, if there are protests, I'm going to send troops into other cities or to other places, how would officers likely be reacting when they hear that?
The concern that our top leadership will have if this continues is, am I going to get to the point where I may have to refuse a direct order to send in or give troops authority to do whatever?
And I would think even contemplating defying an order from the commander-in-chief is a nightmare scenario for most officers.
Sure, contemplating a scenario like that is a career-ending decision.
Unbelievable. Don't you, if you're a journalist, an actual journalist, don't you have to get an actual officer who says, I will not follow orders? Because I'm not hearing that from anybody except that interview. And if you could see the look on O'Keefe's face, this kind of like prompting look, aren't they going to have to disobey the commander-in-chief? I mean, this is trash. It is trash. It's not. So now he asks Chuck Hagel. Now this is the interesting part. This is the history part I want to get to. He asked Chuck Hagel, what's the problem with calling in the National Guard when the police, by the way, had said they can't handle these rioters. This is out of control. They obviously were not getting good leadership. So Trump acted. One federal judge said he couldn't do it and he was going to hand leadership back to the governor of the National Guard. But then the Ninth Circuit said, yes, he can do it and gave leadership back to Trump, which I think is the right decision. Here's why Hagel says this is a bad thing. Cut 3.
Chuck Hagel is an Army veteran and former Republican senator who served as President Obama's defense secretary.
What would be your biggest concern then about having National Guard and Marines deployed in large American cities?
Loss of life, like we saw in 1970.
But 1970 at Kent State.
At Kent State, when the National Guard opened up on students and killed students, partly because they weren't trained. They panicked.
Okay, let's talk about Kent State. I was alive for that. It was 1970. There had been riots on college campuses for years, buildings taken over, administrations intimidated, not knowing how to handle it, not knowing what they should do. Basically, the madmen taking over the asylum, the students taking over the universities, which has now become something that kids think that they're supposed to do. I mean, after the pro-Hamas demonstrations at Columbia, kids were saying, yes, this is the highest expression of my education is protest, which no, it's actually not. It's just breaking it to them. So Lyndon Johnson who set the groundwork for today's debt disaster with the Great Society, some of the worst laws ever passed. But the reason he steps down from office because the war in Vietnam is expanding. He's expanding it and people are going nuts, and it's feeding into these protests, and he's afraid he's going to lose, so he steps down. The anti-communist Richard Nixon, whom the press hates because he was right about the communists, that's why they hate him, and he also he's weird. He's a weird little man on top of that. He runs against the vice president, Hubert Humphrey, wins on a law and order ticket. All right, so he's a law and order ticket. He expands the war into Cambodia to try and end it. He's trying to end it, and he does end it ultimately. And there are protests, including this one at Kent State University, and it gets out of hand, right? There are violent conflicts with the police. The mayor of Kent calls the governor. The governor instantaneously agrees to send in the National Guard. The riots escalate. It's very confusing. Nobody knows why the shots were fired. It's very hard to figure it out. But 4 kids are killed, and I think others were injured. It's a tragedy. These are young people being shot down. They're being shot dead, and it is a heartbreaking tragedy. But again, what is the source of the problem? Now, the left goes nuts, right? There's nationwide demonstrations. Their TV is covering it round the clock. People are doing, woe is me. This is a terrible, terrible thing. Blaming why did they call it the National Guard? There's a famous photograph you could have seen if you're watching in that video of a young girl who was a runaway. She was a girl who had run away from home. She's kneeling over one of the students and screaming. It's an iconic photograph. I'm pretty sure it won the Pulitzer Prize, unlike the Trump fight, fight, fight picture, which was also iconic, just as iconic, but didn't represent the Pulitzer's left-wing bias. So already you're seeing that another kind of reality is being set up here. Songs were written, a famous song by Neil Young, Tin Soldiers, it was called Ohio, Tin Soldiers and Nixon Coming. And remember, Nixon didn't call out the guard. Nixon wasn't involved at all. Tin Soldiers and Nixon Coming, we're finally on our own. This summer, I hear the drumming, 4 dead in Ohio, essentially calling for mass action over the summer. There's a TV movie, there were specials about it, 60 Minutes covered, all that stuff. Here's the point I want to get to. A Gallup poll was taken about how people felt about this. 58% of the respondents blamed the students, blamed the rioters, because you start a riot, you throw things at police, you curse at police, attack them, guns might go off, right? 11% blamed the National Guard. 11% of the people blamed the National Guard, and 31% expressed no opinion, which if we add 31 to 58, that's 89. That's about 90% of the country basically felt FAFO, right? You mess around with the cops, you find out. You mess around with the National Guard, you find out. That's not basically an outrage to most of the people. 90% of the people did not really feel that this was a crisis to blame on the National Guard. Now, there were these big protests and all this, but if you look carefully, and people can say this isn't true, but I swear it's true, that was the end of the campus violence. It's tailed off after that. That was the peak, let's say, of the campus violence. It tailed off after that, and basically with that, the 60s were over, okay? So Nixon ran for re-election, 1972, against a far-left candidate who supported the rioters, George McGovern. He won every single state. Richard Nixon, before he had to resign because of Watergate, he won every single state except Massachusetts, and the largest popular victory, over 60% of any Republican president ever. Okay. Now, I don't maintain that Nixon never did anything wrong during Watergate. He did do wrong things. I do maintain that if they had covered the previous president, Kennedy, the way they covered Nixon, he too had done things wrong and would have had to resign. But they only did it to Nixon because they hated him, because he said that Alger Hiss was a communist spy. I won't go off into all that history, but he was right, and the press was backing Hiss all the way. In a speech at Kent State University to mark the 49th anniversary of the shootings, because we have to remember how horrible the National Guard is, guest speaker Bob Woodward, who pulled off the hit on Nixon with his friend Bernstein, He revealed a 1971 recording of Richard Nixon discussing the Attica prison riot, in which he compared the uprising to the shootings of Kent State and considered that the shootings might have had a salutary effect on his administration. Woodward labeled those remarks chilling and among the most outrageous of the president's statements. Now, Woodward is entitled to his opinion, and I don't want to see anybody get hurt or killed at all during these demonstrations. But to me, Nixon was just being realistic. It was salutary to his administration, and it also stopped the riots, which had been tearing the country apart, and for no reason. It was not really something that needed to be rioted about. So right now, Trump's approval rating is exactly the same as Obama's at the same time in his second administration, about 47%. A majority support his deportation effort. It's up around 55% or something like that. And so all I'm trying to point out here is there are two realities in this country: the reality of the people and the reality of the media. And it's two different realities: the reality of the intellectual class, the elite class, and the reality of everybody else. So when I look at their reality, I have one big question, and that is the question that is the title of Chapter 2. Chapter 2, why don't they care? Do you find yourself tossing and turning all night, constantly flipping your pillow to find the cool side? I do this all the time. If you or your partner are hot sleepers, summer nights can become a battle between exhaustion and overheating. That restless cycle of too hot, too cold, never quite right can leave you longing for the cool, comfortable sleep you deserve. With Boll and Branch's best-selling Percale sheets, you'll finally get the cool sleep you've been craving. These aren't just any ordinary sheets. They're crafted with a special cooling weave using the finest 100% organic cotton that feels crisp and breathable against your skin. Even if you're the sweatiest sleeper in the house, you will stay comfortably cool all night long. And here's the best part: you can try them risk-free with their 30-night guarantee. No matter your bedroom style or mattress size, Boll and Branch has designs and colors to match perfectly. These all-season sheets start with breathable, unmatched softness that only gets better with every wash. Plus, they're crafted by artisans who earn the pay and respect they deserve, so you can feel good about your purchase. I use them. I have this problem with the temperature regulation at night, and they really work great, and they're absolutely nice to look at, and they're comfortable. Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep can make with Boll and Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bollandbranch.com/Klavan. That's Boll and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/ wait a minute, what's that word? Oh, it's Klavan, KLAVAN. Save 15%. Exclusions apply. See site for details. So one of the ideas going around in our wildly corrupt, almost just unimaginably corrupt media is that Trump did this, basically blaming him for the violence in L.A., the burning and the attacks on the police, which were going on before the National Guard got there. He did this because he wanted to keep attention focused on immigration, okay? There's a lot of this is in the press. This is why, because it's popular. Here's the pollster who I kind of like at CNN, Harry Enton. Here's a pollster just to show you an example of this idea that the press is pushing forward, the media is pushing forward. Cut 12.
Why is Trump focusing on immigration? Let me just tell you, this is where Trump wants to focus. Pretty please, with a cherry on top. Why is that? Look at Trump's net approval rating on immigration. Compare where we are now, compare where we were at this point in his first term. In his first term, he was underwater at minus 12 points. Look at where he is today. He's actually above water. This is one of his strongest issues at plus 1 point. And more than that on the net approval for him on this issue has stayed steady in the positive. This is an area where Donald Trump wants to focus, because the bottom line is this is an area in which the American people, at least the bare majority of them, seem to like what he's doing.
Okay, so my question is this: why aren't we focused on it, right? That's why Trump might want to focus on it, but why aren't we focused on it? Why isn't the press covering this every day? This was an engineered invasion of our country by up to 20 million unvetted illegals whose names and purposes and ideas we had no idea, we don't know what they are, because the people who did it, we don't even know who the people who did this were, who engineered this were, because they were hiding behind the corpse of Joe Biden while the press colluded with that conspiracy to hide that from us. Why isn't that the story every single day? Why aren't we focusing on the fact that unlike Obama, unlike Bush, unlike Biden, Trump closed the border in about 15 minutes? It could always be done. It could always be done, and nobody was doing it. We just needed a new president. Now, here's some of the coverage we're getting on this. This is my favorite, actually. The Washington Post. It says, the mysterious drop in fentanyl seizures at the U.S.-Mexico border. It's a mystery. What happened? After years of confiscating rising amounts of fentanyl, the opioid that has fueled the most lethal drug epidemic in American history, U.S. officials are confronting a new and puzzling reality at the Mexican border. Fentanyl seizures are plummeting. The phenomenon has received little notice in Washington, where the Trump administration has made fentanyl trafficking cartels a national security priority. Those two things couldn't possibly be related. Maybe the mystery would be solved there, Sherlock, if we looked into that. The fact that Trump made this a priority, and it happened. What could have caused the drop in fentanyl poisoning, which was just like a plague? It was like a disease going through our country. And it stopped. That's what Trump did. This is this fantasy world that we, by the way, at the Daily Wire, with a lot of our friends, a lot of whom came after us, but the Joe Rogans and the Megyn Kellys and all these people, this is the structure that we have tried. You can disagree with my opinion, and you can disagree with Ben, Matt, Michael. Of course you disagree with Michael. But you can disagree with. But we came here to Earth to tell you that it's all a lie, that people are not upset about Kent State, that Nixon was not necessarily thrown out of office deservedly, that the entire history of the 20th century and now the 21st century is being written by people with interests who lie to you. And it's hard to get around that because it creates an emotional atmosphere. Even if you know you're being lied to, it catches you up. You spend a lot of time getting angry that the things you see in front of your eyes are not the things you're seeing on the press. And this is the fantasy world we're trying to break through. Just for a minute to go off on a tangent here about the economy, right? What's happening in the economy? Here's the Wall Street Journal. Muted May inflation defies tariff fears. Consumer prices rose 2.4% over the year with a lower than expected month-over-month increase. It's down. I think it's down the lowest it is. It's certainly in years and years. Inflation is down the lowest. Now, this is after the Wall Street Journal, day after day after day, told us inflation was coming because of the tariffs, like a woman screaming in the top of a burning building. They've been screaming about tariffs. And the other story that the Wall Street Journal did cover, duties generated $37.8 billion in revenue for the U.S. in April and May. So we not only are paying less, all of us are paying less, but our country is making more money. Why? Because of the tariffs, because of new tariffs on steel, aluminum, cars, and goods from China, Mexico, and Canada, which is just like Trump said. And they're saying, well, $37.8 billion. He said it was more. But you said it was nothing. You said it was bad. And it's actually a positive, right? But no one is going to say that. And now Trump says he may have a deal with China. That would be cool if it's a good deal. Trump shuts off an invasion. So that's a military win, right? I mean, that's like he won a battle. He went out single-handedly and not single-handedly, of course, because our great border enforcement officers were doing it, but he led them to win a battle like that. He won the battle of America. He won the cut down on the fentanyl disease that's been coming on. The economy is reacting in positive ways that he said he would. If I were still playing the Trump happiness montage, which of course I'm not because we've run that joke into the ground, so we're never playing it again, but I would be playing it right now to celebrate what Trump has done. Who is celebrating? So why don't they care? Why don't they care that good things are happening in America? Why doesn't the press care? Why doesn't the left care? Why doesn't anybody care about us? Why don't they care about us? Why do they care so deeply about a gangster who allegedly beat his wife? Make sure of bringing that guy back into the country so we can try him for his crimes here. Why do they care so much, but not about the girls who've been and the children who've been molested and the drugs that have been brought over and the people who've died? Why don't they care? I mean, look, you hate Trump? Fine. You love Trump? Fine. I'm here for my country. I love this country. And it seems to me the biggest problem that we have is not Trump calling out the National Guard on a city that's being run by buffoons like Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom saying, arrest me, bro. But don't arrest me now because I got to get to the French Laundry for dinner. Where has it happened? These guys have developed this philosophy that makes the United States, capitalism, and the Jews the bad guys, instead of America being the beacon of nations, capitalism being the greatest engineer of wealth in the world has ever seen, and socialism being inherently authoritarian because it gives all the power over money to the state. It's inherently authoritarian and oppressive. And the Jews, who have been one of the greatest forces in humankind. If they had only written the Bible, if they had only given us Jesus Christ, and hadn't won so many Nobel Prizes in the sciences, and hadn't invented a Hollywood, which in its prime was the greatest propaganda for the United States of America ever made, if they hadn't revolutionized banking, if they hadn't revolutionized businesses, they'd still be great. They would still be a great people. Those are the worst people on earth. The left, the media, the Democrats, they're so concerned that gangsters not be deported and that people who broke the law not be prosecuted. Why don't they care? I don't get it. I'm serious. They have developed this ideology, and so many of them are mentally ill. I mean, I wasn't joking about mentally ill women in the left, and their men have a lot of mental illness too. They're just not thinking clearly. I mean, having border laws is not an atrocity. Nobody's telling Iran, the Jews are really having a hard time in Israel. You should be taking in more Jews into your country and treating them like citizens and letting them become citizens. Why is that? Why are they only saying it to America? Why do they only say it to France and England? And England, which is now Englandistan, Britain is now basically, when I lived there in the 90s, it was bliss. You could walk home at 2:00 in the morning. You were perfectly safe. Now there are people online saying if you're a woman walking around without a headscarf, you get hooted at by Muslim wolf gangs, treading the street. Why is it only the Western nations have to take in all these immigrants illegally and not the rest of the world? Why isn't Africa? Why aren't we saying to Africa, you've got to take in more, people from Europe? I mean, why isn't it? And why don't they care about London? Why did the leadership in London, both on the Tories and the Labour Party, hand that country over to this group who's antithetical to Western governance? Why did they do that? While the people were begging them, get out of the EU, just so we don't have to take these immigrants anymore. Stop bringing in these immigrants. And they said they would, and they ran on the fact that they would, and they lied and lied and lied, and now England is gone. I don't know if Britain is ever coming back. And they want to do it to us now, too. And why don't they care? Why are the people in the news media so eager to tell us, here's a military man who thinks the illegal immigrants are great. Here's Chuck Hagel. He was in the Army. He was a Republican. Then he was in the Obama administration. So he's very moderate. He's in between. He doesn't care about all that. But he's going to tell us that this is Kent State. And that Kent State was bad, by the way. Instead of Kent State, maybe being a lesson that the children had to learn before so they didn't burn down the colleges that were trying to educate them so they might be useful. I want to play. I mean, when Donald Trump was on trial in New York, he had written the wrong thing on a check, right? He was trying to pay off this woman he'd slept with, or said he didn't sleep with, but may have slept with. And he was trying to pay her off, tell her to shut up. And his lawyer paid her off. And then he wrote a check paying back the lawyer and said, these are legal fees. That was his crime. And so that's a misdemeanor, keeping wrong business records. The statute of limitations ran out. So they said, yes, but it was a misdemeanor in service of a felony, so you can still be tried. What was the felony? You don't know. I know you don't know because the judge didn't know. The jury didn't know. They just convicted him anyway. All right. Now, all we heard was this, cut 11.
The idea that no person is above the law is a bedrock principle of American justice.
No man is above the law, no matter what the crime.
And I agree with you. No man is above the law, and no person is above the law.
No one is above the law.
No one is above the law.
No one's above the law.
No one is above the law.
No man is above the law.
Nobody is above the law.
No one is above the law.
No man is above the law.
He has to be held accountable. He's not above the law.
No one's above the law. Either that nor any other title puts you above the rule of law. And no one is truly above the law. That is what it means to have a rule of law. That is what it means to not have a king.
They're not above the law.
Nobody is above the law.
Everyone will be treated, as Merrick Garland has said, as equally.
Well, that no one is above the law, which is foundational.
No one is above the law, even a former president.
So why don't they care? Why don't they care that the law is being broken? When a senator jumps in on Kristi Noem's, press conference and pushes past law enforcement, and he's carried out of the room, and he says, "Oh, I'm a senator." No one's above the law. Why don't they care? Why don't they care? I'm going to play a long clip here from my favorite newswoman, Brian Stelter. And Miss Brian Stelter put together a clip. This is back in 2020, I guess. This is back in 2020 when conservatives were saying Joe Biden is mentally deficient. All right. And so Miss Brian Stelter, and I only call him that because he missed a deadline in order to go to bed and have a good cry during COVID. And obviously you can't do that and have even one testicle. So, I'm not trying to insult him. I love women, but still, though I do wonder if he is a woman, why is he bald? But still, all right, so he puts together a supercut of conservatives attacking Joe Biden and then responds to it. There's a long cut, but it's worth hearing, only to hear Rush Limbaugh's voice again.
The contrast in knowledge of events and issues, mental acuity, the contrast between Trump and Biden is striking. It's why they're keeping Biden in the basement.
I actually don't believe Joe Biden is working out of his house. I believe he's working out of a nursing home or an assisted living home, because that's what he needs.
The big problem for Joe Biden is that he is falling apart. He's just falling apart.
He's not really running for the office. It's the communists that he picks as his number two who will be running America within 3 months after he is sent to the long, long rest he has worked for all of his life. A blanket over his hips, around-the-clock sweets, around-the-clock care. The man needs the care right now. I pity the man.
My physical as well as my mental.
Every day, this is what's airing on the radio. There's Michael Savage saying, I pity the man. There's Mark Levin saying, I think Biden's in a nursing home. What the heck is going on these programs? Look at what Fox News saw on Saturday at Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. This is Joe Biden out there on a vigorous bike ride. Not wearing a helmet, but definitely wearing a mask, by the way. Fox's narrative and talk radio's narrative for months has been that Joe Biden is falling apart. You just heard Ben Shapiro say it, falling apart. And there he is riding a bike, out for a bike ride. And Fox, of all networks, is the one that showed it happen.
Here's Brian Stelter talking about the videos of riots, burning, gas, rocks being thrown in L.A. just the other day, cut 7.
The Defense Department earlier today, the DOD's rapid response account on X saying LA is burning. Of course, Monday morning, there were no fires burning this morning in LA. So that kind of very hyped up, very hypercharged rhetoric coming from Trump, coming from his agencies, and coming from his MAGA media outlets. And I've noticed, Brianna, we all live on our phones these days. We're all scrolling through social media. You've got to be careful at a delicate moment like this to look at the timestamps, look at the dates, look at when things are actually posted, and if they're really from the situation they're purporting to be. A lot of these algorithms are surfacing hours old or even days old content. So you might be looking at a video of something, wondering what's happening in LA. It's actually from 2 days ago. And that's, it only matters because it can give people a false impression of what's actually happening at a moment of unrest.
Don't believe your eyes, because that video may have been 2 hours old. I mean, they may have burned down that building 2 hours ago. Why is this woman still on the air? Seriously, are any of these people still? Why is Jake Tapper on the air? Why are all the people who lied to us about Joe Biden? Why are they still on the air? Why don't they care about their integrity? Why don't they care about their credibility? Why don't they care about the fact that they lied and lied and lied and are lying now in the same way they lied during the George Floyd? This is something I think we really. I'm being serious. I don't understand why it is that nobody says, "Hey, these people have disgraced us. Take them off." Why don't they care? With AI disrupting jobs, shifting global politics, and unpredictable markets, people are focused on protecting their financial futures. Most are underinsured and overpaying for life insurance, especially those relying only on employer policies. That's where SelectQuote comes in, helping you find better coverage that fits your actual needs and budget. For over 40 years, SelectQuote has helped more than 2 million Americans find the right life insurance coverage by doing the shopping for you. Their licensed agents work on your behalf completely free to compare policies from top-rated carriers and find the best fit for your health and budget in as little as 15 minutes. Whether you need coverage without a medical exam, have pre-existing conditions like high blood pressure or diabetes, or want same-day coverage up to $2 million, they've got partners who can help. Since life insurance rates are at historic lows right now, just head to SelectQuote.com and a licensed agent will call you right away to find the right policy for your life and budget. This is important. You don't want to worry about this. You don't want something bad to happen and not be prepared. Get the right life insurance for you for less and save more than 50% at SelectQuote.com/Klavan. Save more than 50% on term life insurance at SelectQuote.com/Klavan today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/Klavan. Be prepared. Learn how to spell Klavan. There are no E's in Klavan. I just make it look this easy. Chapter 3, who are these guys? The federal authorities, the FBI, according to Kash Patel, are investigating the origins and funding sources of the recent wave of violent protests that began in Los Angeles and have since spread across the country. Kash Patel said the FBI is investigating any and all monetary connection responsible for these riots. So who are these people who are rioting and who are supposedly going to be demonstrating in cities across the country tomorrow, Saturday? Tablet Magazine had an interview with Kyle Scheidler, a senior analyst at the Center for Security Policy, and he said clearly this was not a handful of Antifa guys just tracking ICE and causing mischief. This was intended to provoke a larger event. And what he says about this is that these rioters, these are all different organizations, different leftist organizations, they were going for the pro-Hamas issue. But that's not good for the Democrat Party because, it's supporting evil. Most people in America support Israel. They have a lot of Jewish donors and a lot of Jewish supporters. So that's not a good look for them. But what this is the traditional American left establishment, the Democrat Party, essentially, reclaiming control of the street radicals. These are their foot soldiers. These are guys they're sending out to accomplish what they want to do. And they get funding from George Soros and all these different people, a bunch of Soros money. And they used to get funding under Biden from us, from the federal government. The Homeland Security was sending money to some of these organizations who then when George Floyd was killed, or when he died, they went out and burned things down. So the thing is, these are organizations that go out, and yes, there are idealistic, mentally ill young women who are going out with ideals and who want to see, who have some idea that these are the nice, Mexican nanny or something who's been here for 20 years and now she's being thrown out of the country, which really I don't think what Trump is looking for. But why are those people there? Why are their ideals fixated on the fate of people who have broken our laws to come here and not on the good of the country? So Douglas Murray was covering this, a little bit of the ideas among the youth. And he says a 2022 Harvard youth poll found that almost half of Americans ages 18 to 29, almost half of Americans ages 18 to 29 would vote for a candidate who agrees that pupils in K through 12 public schools should be taught that racism is a fixture of American laws and institutions. This is a racist country. They are also demonstrably less patriotic than older Americans. As recently as 2013, 85% of Americans ages 18 to 29 said they were extremely or very proud to be an American. By 2023, 10 years later, just 18% of young Americans agreed with the statement that they were extremely proud to be Americans. Perhaps that's because among Americans ages 18 to 29, 44% had a positive view of socialism, which is, as I say, inherently authoritarian. It will become authoritarian. It cannot not become authoritarian because it centers all that power in the state. Only 40% of young people had a positive view of capitalism. By 2020, only 39% of Americans under the age of 30 saw their founding fathers as heroes, while an astonishing 31% saw them as villains. Jeff Anderson, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, he's from the American Main Street Initiative. He was writing at City Journal. He talks about the work they're doing at the Jefferson Memorial. He says, in direct defiance of President Trump's recent executive order saying that the Smithsonian, the National Park Service, and others should avoid divisive narratives that distort and rewrite America's history and inappropriately disparage our heroes, the National Park Service is nearing completion of a project that would transform the basement museum at the Jefferson Memorial in exactly that manner. Instead of celebrating Jefferson, as it was made to do by FDR, who wanted to link his administration to Jefferson's, even though they were antithetical, even though they were actually philosophically opposed. He wanted to link it to Jefferson and make Jefferson the hero of freedom that in fact he was. Now they're going to emphasize the fact that there was a slave trade, that he owned slaves, that he allegedly, and I don't believe the story actually, that he allegedly had an affair with a slave. That is completely unproved, even though it's become sacred writ. They created these people, these idealistic people, who are being used by the people they fund to cause riots, all right? So yes, there are many peaceful people out there who are created by the left in their education system, their news media, their entertainment media to hate the country that has served the world so well, and now they're funding radicals to go into those demonstrations and turn them into riots. And then they say, yes, but they were mostly peaceful. None of it is peaceful. These are the foot soldiers of the left, and they're the foot soldiers of the Democrat Party. This is the thing. This is a mainstream move. They are using them to try and overturn Trump and try and overturn his administration and turn people against his administration, which, by the way, is going really well. I mean, it's going really well. It's not perfect. He's not where he wants to be. He's not where any of us want to be. But inflation is down. The border is closed, which is huge. Fentanyl is down. We're making more money off of some of his tariffs. You know, he's negotiating with other countries. What's the problem? And if things are going that well, why don't they care? One thing I really love to eat is Alaskan halibut. And I went to Alaska and actually fished for halibut, the most boring fish to catch. They just lie there on the line until you haul them up. But it tastes so good. And it's hard to get really good fresh fish. That's where Wild Alaskan Company knocks it out of the park. They deliver the best wild-caught seafood straight to your home. Each portion is perfectly sized in 6-ounce portions and packed with nutrients you won't find in regular store-bought fish. Once you taste the difference, you will never go back. Their fish is 100% wild-caught, never farmed, which means you're getting pure seafood with no antibiotics, GMOs, or additives. These pristine fish support both healthy oceans and fishing communities while delivering exceptional flavor. It really does taste good. At least when my wife cooks it, maybe when your wife cooks it too, probably. Plus, each catch is flash frozen right on the boat to preserve its natural taste, texture, and beneficial omega-3s. When you join Wild Alaskan Company, you are not just getting extraordinary seafood, you're supporting sustainable harvesting practices in Alaska while enjoying flexible deliveries and expert cooking guidance that makes every meal special. Not all fish are the same. Get seafood you can trust. Go to wildalaskan.com/Klavan for $35 off your first box of premium wild-caught seafood. That's wildalaskan.com/Klavan for $35 off your first order. Thanks to the Wild Alaskan Company for sponsoring this episode and for sending me that delicious fish. Final chapter, who do you trust? You know, I always tell you get tomorrow's news today, and that's not doing myself enough credit. I've been talking about the information crisis since at least 2020, I think before that, but I remember doing an entire show on the information crisis, and that so much of what we're seeing is this information crisis, which has been false through the 60s up till today. So we've been even our history is false. And that, what does that do? That empowers nutcases and people like Darryl Cooper to tell us, oh, that Churchill was the bad guy in World War II and Hitler wasn't really so bad. He wasn't really an anti-Semite. You know, all this nonsense that comes out. And I don't even blame some people for saying, well, we've been lied to and lied to and lied to. If this is the opposite of what they're saying, it must be the truth, which of course is not logical and doesn't make sense, but there it is. So now everybody is talking about the information crisis. There must have been 5 large articles about it over the course of the last month. And Andy Kessler at the Wall Street Journal just wrote a piece called "Can You Trust Anybody?" pointing out that Americans' trust in government and trust in the press has just absolutely nosedived. I mean, it is completely nosedived. So last Sunday was Pentecost in my religion, which is Christianity. And this is when the church becomes the church, and the resurrected Christ has left town to go to heaven, and he says, you won't be able to see me anymore, but I'm going to send you the Holy Spirit, okay? And through the Holy Spirit, you will be able to see me. And on Pentecost, also called Whitsunday, the Holy Spirit descends, and suddenly all the apostles start talking in tongues, which means in foreign languages that they don't know. It doesn't mean what the TV preachers tell you that suddenly if I say blah, 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 that I'm talking in tongues. No, it means they were talking in Greek, they were talking in Latin, they were talking in tongues from all the Jews of the diaspora could could understand them. And this was the opposite, basically. This was the salvation of the Tower of Babel. In the Tower of Babel, the nations were split apart because they couldn't understand one another. And this is saying, even in all your languages, you will all be able to understand the Word of God. Unlike the Quran, which can't be translated, the Word of God can be translated because it's written on your heart, and the words on the page are only there to sort of reinforce that. Now, this thing, when you can't see somebody, Plato said that he didn't like writing because the living person wasn't there to be questioned. So the words were there, but the words are not the truth. The words are just an image of the truth. You have to talk to the person and see his face and get a sense of his character. And so when Jesus leaves, how do you communicate with him? You communicate with him through the Holy Spirit. Through your faith, you are given the gift of the Holy Spirit, and that allows you, if you try and work at it and read the words and think about it and listen to your church experts and all this stuff, that you start to discern what God wants. At the point when the Roman Church lost its monopoly over Western Christianity, this created a big problem because the words of God were now separated from the body of Christ, right? So it was just like when they say sola scriptura, it's supposed to mean scripture alone, but it also means writing alone. So you're getting that writing without the face of Christ in front of you that you can see and you can question, you can judge. You can say, well, what does this mean? What does these words mean? I can translate in different ways. And, you just hear people who don't know what they're talking about telling you things because that's what it says on the page. So this is the big theme. And I'm getting back to the riots and all this. I'm not going astray here. This is the big theme in Shakespeare. Shakespeare is all about how do you trust people. If you look at all his tragedies, his most important tragedies, they're all about trust. They're all tragedies of trust. Othello trusts a friend who is not what he seems, who's actually his enemy. Lear trusts the daughters who say they love him instead of the daughter who really loves him. Macbeth trusts his wife and some witches who are actually working for Satan. Hamlet can't trust anybody. He doesn't know who to trust. Even the ghost of his father he can't trust. And this is where the idea comes from that words have no meaning, and the things that we believe are not based on anything solid. They're just opinions. They're just fictions. They're stories that are being told that we have no way of knowing which ones are true and which ones aren't true. So when I tell you, oh, you're just saying that there's a lot of black crime because you don't like black people, you feel convicted because we all have a sense of guilt because we're all sinful. And that is what the left has been working on. They've been working on the fact that words have become detached from meaning because we no longer trust, because we no longer have faith, we no longer trust in what we see. And the fact is, what we see is not the perfect truth. It's a version of the truth, but we can see rightly. We can see wrongly. We can see a dragon that's not really there. And because we know that's wrong, we know there is a world that we can see that is true. And what the left has done is it has used this distrust, which is a sour fruit of the tree of faithlessness, okay? It is the fact that we have lost our faith, that we have lost our religion, that we no longer have the Holy Spirit through which we connect to God. We can no longer question God in our hearts and say, have I got this right? Am I reading the Bible right? I'm reading the Bible and yet I'm being hateful online and shouting at people about the Bible, and that doesn't seem right. Am I right about that? There's no way to check it anymore because we're disconnected from the source of our soul information. So how do we know the source when we see it? We know it because of the character of the people. When you look at my face, you can tell I'm a horrible human being and every word I'm saying is deceiving you. Or you can tell that I'm a wonderful guy. This would be my argument. You can tell that I'm a wonderful guy and, hey, maybe this is a guy who's really trying to get a truth to you that matters to you. This is what the second part of the New Testament, the epistles, is all about. This is Paul. People quote Paul all the time as if he had the right of judgment that only belongs to God. Well, Paul said this, so if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. But that's not what Paul is really talking about. What Paul is mostly talking about is what you have to do to make people believe the gospel. He's saying to you that you are in possession of a great truth, which is the truth of the loving, living God. You are in possession of that. Now make sure you sell it. So he says, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. He says, give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. I don't offend the Jews. I don't offend the Greeks, so that they may be saved. It doesn't mean he has no morality. It doesn't mean he has nothing to say. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a point of view. It doesn't mean he won't stand up and say what he has to say. He did to his great detriment and ultimately to his martyrdom. But he's saying you have to be the person who represents these things. Whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. As we watch LA burn, and as we watch whatever happens this Saturday, and as we watch people favor Iran over the free state of Israel, ask yourself this. Who are these people? Who is speaking the truth? Who is speaking the truth? Who is representing the truth? How do I get back to a place where I can be connected to God? And if I'm screaming at people, and if I'm treating people like garbage, and if I'm signing on to the angriest, most dishonest, most low person on X or whatever social media you're looking at, how am I going to build the new world that the election of Donald Trump has opened to us? Because the election of Donald Trump represents a triumph of new media, of the people who don't lie to you or try not to lie to you. And who are you going to listen to? Which members of that media are you going to listen to? Whose books are you going to read? Whose ideas are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to a guy who tells you, Hitler was not such a bad guy? Winston Churchill, he was the really bad guy. Think it through. Think it through, because we are at the moment, we are on the border of the promised land. And if we cannot become the people who deserve to go in, we will not go in. And this is why I keep harping on this, and I'm going to talk more about it next week, if we're still here next week, but I hope we will be. And we'll just go from that to the Klapbacks. Father's Day is almost here, and so is your last chance to give him the gift of DailyWire Plus for 40% off. Give your dad access to our library of exclusive entertainment, including What is a Woman, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's Parenting, and the most fearless voices in media, uncensored and ad-free. Go to dailywire.com/gift before the deal disappears. All right, before we get to the Klapbacks, I just got an update that Iran is now firing missiles back at Israel. We knew this was going to happen. Israel has warned its people that it's going to happen, and we're just going to have to see as the weekend develops. It's going to be an interesting weekend, and if I'm not here, it will be because I was in the rapture and I'm gone. So let's get to Klavan Klapbacks.
So you might be looking at a video of something, wondering what's happening in LA. It's actually from 2 days ago.
Just when I think you've said the stupidest thing ever, you keep talking.
All right, it's Klavan Klapbacks at dailywire.com. It's Klavan with a K, Klapbacks with a K. Ask us anything you want, personal advice, political, religious. We will try and answer your questions. This one's from Tony. It says, Dear Andrew Klavan and staff, Dear Andrew Klavan and staff, I have been wondering for the past 7 months since the happiness montage was created from Trump's more winning speech, who is the man yelling yay in the montage at the end of the montage? That's a good question. Let's take a look at that.
We're going to win so much. We're going to win at every level.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
We're going to win economically. We're going to win with the economy. We're going to win with military. We're going to win with health care and for our veterans. We're going to win with every single facet.
Zippity-dee-dah, zippity-yay. My, oh my. What a wonderful day.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning. Yay! You'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore.
I feel pretty, oh so pretty. I feel pretty and witty and gay.
We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more.
It's Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, at the end of It's a Wonderful Life, when everything turns out well. All right, hey, I had to answer the question, right? From Closet Evangelism, dearest Klavan, I must say I fundamentally disagree with you that the Gospels tell us Christ never called out people's sin in their presence. I didn't say that. Jesus most definitely called out people's sin while in their midst by saying, go and sin no more, and I believe we ought to follow that example. What I said was that we don't know what Christ said when he ate dinner with people who the Pharisees said were sinners. So they were, people who had were tax collectors who were corrupt, or, they ran bars, they were prostitutes, and he hung out with all those people. And we don't know what he said at those things. And of course, we know he didn't want you to sin. I don't want you to sin either. But we don't, I kind of just have this feeling, and I don't know either, right? Because it's not in the gospel. I just have this feeling that he didn't spend all of dinner screaming at them and wagging his finger at them. And I think if we do that, again, Paul is telling us that we should be the kind of people who can sell the gospel, right? Is that would you buy a gospel from that man? A guy who's always yelling at you and telling you what a bad guy you are and how, disgusting you are and how sinful you are, and you've got to be great like he is because he has Jesus. I mean, that I see a lot of this online, and I just think it's a really, really bad evangelism. We're going to go into Member Block, and in Member Block, I'm going to be talking about 3 small crime films that you have never seen. And so, that's the kind of stuff you want to find out about, because these are movies you've never seen that I think are really cool, really good. I will not be mentioning Shock to the System, which is a small crime film that I wrote that you've never seen, which is really good. But I won't be mentioning that because that would be plugging myself, and I wouldn't do that. So you won't want to watch Shock to the System with Michael Cain, which is free on YouTube. But you do want to become a member so you can have these wonderful moments before you're plunged into Klavanlessness and a darkness that is kind of beyond my ability to describe, because it's beyond anybody's ability to describe, because it's simply nothingness. It's simply a kind of nothingness. So there are no words to describe it. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Use code Klavan at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. If you are not a member, you are now plunged into the depths of that darkness. If you are a member, you got about 10 minutes. So come over to Member Block.